We're on our final video then. We're going to have a look at who regulates financial reporting. Now, the first thing I need to say is that we're having a look at who regulates financial reporting in terms of who sets the standards. But who regulates the application of accounting standards, well, that will really depend on the jurisdiction you're in. So in the UK, we have the Companies Act that specifies the layout of financial statements and what financial reporting framework we should use. And also the London Stock Exchange would also have their own requirements along with European Union regulations in our jurisdiction as well. It really depends on where you live and which jurisdiction you're in as to how these standards are applied. So who regulates financial reporting then? Well, the short answer to that is, well, your own local jurisdiction and what their requirements are. However, the people that oversee international financial reporting and who set the international accounting standards is drawn out on this diagram that's in your notes. Now, there's various different bodies involved in setting accounting standards and developing the conceptual framework that we saw in the previous session. So we'll start at the top then, the International Accounting Standards Committee Foundation, sometimes known as the IFRS Foundation. Well, these are the supervisory body, these are the supervisory board. These people appoint, oversee and raise funds for the activities of the Accounting Standards Board. The Accounting Standards Board. Now, members of the Accounting Standards Board are appointed from the IFRS Foundation, the International Accounting Standards Committee Foundation. Now, what they do is they are the driving force in developing a high set of quality global accounting standards. They're actually based in London. Okay, so I can trot along to the International Accounting Standards Board meetings and go and see them in action, because they all hold public meetings when developing or discussing accounting standards. Now, the IASB, for short, they set the technical agenda. They decide what standards they need to create or what standards they need to update or abolish. Okay? Now, accounting standards are in a constant state of flux. They are continuously being updated. Okay? Just recently, there's been several new standards that have been issued by the IASB. And you could take a look at their website if you like. If you go onto ifrs.org and have a look at their activities, you'll get to see what they're doing on a daily basis. And it's quite a lot at the minute. So, they set the technical agenda, they approve standards, which is what I've already mentioned. They'll approve standards and publish them. Exposure drafts and interpretations. Now, exposure drafts are just draft standards. They will issue them out to the public and then will receive comments on those exposure drafts. They'll then hold several public meetings to discuss that draft standard before issuing an international financial reporting standard. Now, they have such a big job, the board, that sometimes they need people to help them out. And these are the two bodies at the bottom. Now, the IFRS Foundation will appoint a Standards Advisory Council or an IFRS Advisory Council, and will also appoint the International Financial Reporting Interpretations Committee, the IFRS Interpretations Committee, if you like. Now, the Standards Advisory Council, as the name suggests, helps the International Accounting Standards Board develop new standards. So they really are there to advise the IASB. Now, the Standards Advisory Council will be there to advise IASB on their agenda, but also to help them out with assessing the impact of standards on the various industries affected. So really, they do help the IASB out quite a lot and give them advice and advise them on their current work plan and what they are doing on their agenda at the minute. And they will help develop those standards. So they will be a key player in helping develop those quality global of reporting standards. Now, the Interpretations Committee are appointed by the IFRS Foundation, and they essentially report to the IASB. Now, what they do is they help the IASB improve existing standards. They deal with issues in terms of conflicting interpretations that people have with existing standards. And they will report their findings to the IASB and let them know if there is any problems with any current existing standards once they've been applied in the industry. Now, what they will also do is issue interpretations if there is a very big issue with an existing standard that needs to be resolved. So they will issue what is known as interpretations, what I like to think of them as emergency standards. Now, you'll never be tested on emergency standards because usually they're very specific to a particular issue that an industry has. For example, the supermarket industry had issues with how they recognise income and expenses on a customer loyalty card scheme. And as such, they issued an emergency standard specific to supermarkets or the retail industry. Okay? So if a standard is maybe not specific enough and we need further guidance, the IFRIC will come in, the IFRS Interpretations Committee, and see if they can issue further guidance, these emergency standards or interpretations. So what you must know is that the IASB really is the driving force in setting the standards and developing standards. The Standards Advisory Council helps them to develop new standards, and the Interpretations Committee are there to deal with any issues or conflicts arising in existing standards. The IFRS Foundation sits at the top and oversees what the IASB and the other bodies are doing as well. Okay, so they're the supervisory board on the top. You can get tested on what these various different entities do within financial reporting, international financial reporting. So do make sure you learn these different bodies and what they do. And like I say, feel free to go and have a look on the internet about them and see what they're up to at the minute. It really does make for interesting reading. You're accountants now, you've got to be interested in this sort of stuff. Anyway, now the final bit of the syllabus then is really thinking about who is responsible for preparing an entity's own financial statements. And we have to think about the responsibilities of those charged with governance. Now, governance is the system by which organisations are directed and controlled by the board of directors. Okay? So the board of directors are appointed by shareholders to safeguard their assets. Now, their assets would be the cash that they invest in the business, which the directors will then safeguard and use appropriately to buy other assets to generate income and therefore a return to the shareholders. So governance is about how a business is directed and controlled from the top. Now, because there is this distinguishment between ownership, remember the owners of the business of a limited company would be the shareholders, and the people that control the business, the directors, because there's a distinction between ownership and control, there has to be a good set of quality financial information so the directors can adequately communicate with the shareholders about how well they've looked after the shareholders' assets. Now, what we must do then is consider, well, whose responsibility is it to give good quality information to the shareholders? Now, we have to think about the role of two different people. The role of the director of a limited company, but also the role of an external auditor. And we've got to think about these roles in terms of financial reporting. So, let's have a look at the role of the directors first. Now, in terms of preparing financial statements, the directors are responsible for the proper preparation of those financial statements and making sure that they do give a true and fair view of the company's financial performance and position. Now, to give that fair presentation, remember, they must conform to accounting standards and they must also apply the framework. Okay? So it's the directors that are responsible for the proper preparation of the financial statements and making sure that they conform to IFRS, International Financial Reporting Standards. It's their responsibility. Now, what is also their responsibility is that they have to take steps reasonably open to them to prevent and detect any fraud. So put systems in place to prevent fraud, but also to detect them. So maybe they might take steps to prevent fraud by inserting CCTV, let's say, so we can make sure that none of the staff or any people that walk in and out of the business, steal anything, okay, or try and defraud the business in some way, shape or form. Making sure that there is honest conduct of the business, doing everything in good faith, safeguarding the shareholders' assets that I've mentioned, and ensuring the reliability of the information that is being produced and given to the shareholders. Okay, that's the director's responsibilities in terms of financial reporting to the shareholders. Now let's contrast that to another body that's involved with the shareholders, and that's external auditors. Now, external auditors are actually appointed by the shareholders of the business. Okay, so it's not the directors who employ the auditor, it's the shareholders of the business that employ the auditor through the business's annual general meeting. All right, so the shareholders will appoint an external auditor. Now, external auditors are there to express their opinion on the truth and fairness of financial statements. All they are doing is expressing an opinion on a document the directors are responsible to produce. And they are going to communicate to the shareholders of that business whether that financial information does give a fair presentation, a true and fair view. Okay? So all they are there to do is to give their opinion to the company's shareholders. So it is not their responsibility to prepare the financial statements. It is not their responsibility to prevent and detect fraud. It is their responsibility to just express an opinion. So, external auditors really should have a reasonable expectation of detecting any material misstatements. Okay? So you'd like to think by the auditors going and having a look at the financial statements of a business that if there is any misstatements, we'd like to think that they may find them. Okay? If they suspect fraud, then the external auditor should bring this to the attention of the directors, and then the directors would be responsible for doing something about it. So, if fraud is discovered, bearing in mind it's not up to the auditors to detect fraud, okay, but if they do, in carrying out their audit of the financial statements, then they should tell the directors about that as soon as possible. And the auditor should also consider reporting fraud to external authorities if it's in the public interest. Okay, so we consider reporting fraud to the police or other external authority if it's in the public interest. Okay, so that's the external auditor's responsibilities, and I really want to zoom in on a particular point in terms of responsibilities of financial statements. It is not the auditor's responsibility to prevent and detect fraud. It is the director's responsibility. And we said that first of all. Now, if the auditors do come across fraud, then they should report it to the management. But it's certainly not their responsibility to find fraud. Okay? If they find it in doing their tests, fine. But it is not their responsibility. Okay? And that's really an important point. Really, it's the directors that are responsible for preparing the financial statements. The auditors are there to express their opinion to the shareholders of the business that are receiving those financial statements. There we go. That's F3. So, hopefully you found these recordings useful over the last few weeks. We should be doing some sort of revision recording. So once you've made sure that you've had a really good overview of all the videos and of all the chapters, you can then proceed to have a look at the revision recordings. Okay? But you should now be in a position now to certainly have a go at some questions in your revision kit, and I wish you every success in that. So, well done, thank you for sticking with it, and I shall see you on revision.